spirit that is spirit form and consciousness of the human. The spirit is a purely creative energy with immense power through which man is animated, like every form of life at all. The spirit, which has nothing to do with the consciousness of man nor other forms of life, corresponds to a pure creative energy and power, which is directly connected with creation universal consciousness and with all its energy and strength. In contrast to consciousness and its energy and power, the spirit is immortal and subordinate to the continued existence, and until a distant time a reunion with the creation universal consciousness, or that is with the creation energy. In contrast to consciousness, whose activity and energy can be measured technically and electronically, the energy of the spirit and the spirit are not measurable. The spirit that is the spiritual form of man, and other forms of life, is the reincarnation that is the rebirth, which is not the case for consciousness and its energy and strength. The spirit of man that is the energy of the spirit collects impulsively knowledge from the consciousness of man and cumulates it to wisdom that is impulse-prone energy. So everything happens purely impulsive and has nothing to do with thoughts, that is to do with a way of thinking, as is solely the case with consciousness. As a result of the misunderstanding of human beings, which is still existing in the time of Jmmanuel, erroneously called Jesus Christ, with regard to many different concepts, consciousness, the ancient and widespread concept of spirit was used, which has been preserved to this day, creating a tremendous misunderstanding and confusion. Jmmanuel was aware that the concept of spirit was not correct, but he could not use the correct concept of consciousness as a result of the ignorance of the people of that time. So he had no other choice but to make the values of the doctrine of the prophets teaching the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of life, and the meaning and value of the prayers, the term spirit. And since the concept of spirit was understood by man as that, and is still understood today by what is done and done by consciousness, thoughts are thought, actions are devised, and ideas are created and executed by the subconscious, made inventions, poems, rhymes, and writings, and so on, and so on. The word spirit came to mean what had to be understood, and this is still the case today among the ignorant people of the earth, so that the term spirit is still understood in the old sense as that which applies to consciousness in every respect. In fact, however, the spirit is not the jumping factor for everything, such as thoughts, ideas, inventions, etc., but solely the consciousness of man, for only this is directed to be thoughtful. However, the fact that the term spirit was used in the old days instead of the concept of consciousness did not in itself constitute an obstacle, for when the creative spirit in man, the creative human form of the spirit, is addressed by man himself, whether in a simple self-communicative form or with regard to a prayer in expressive devotion, then in earthly sense what is fundamental and correct is the consciousness, whereby a directive is given, through which something definite can come about or be done by man himself. So the whole thing also works in this way. Although the wrong concept of spirit is understood to mean something completely wrong, and in principle, consciousness must be understood, which, as a rule, is not known to the people of the earth. However, as a result of the misunderstanding, it is so that, without the human being knowing, the consciousness is automatically addressed by the response of the spirit, because there is a direct, energetic connection between the spirit form and the consciousness, because only through the spiritual energy, which corresponds to a very fine-grained electromagnetic energy, human consciousness is functional. The seat of the creative human spirit, that is the spirit form, is located in the roof of the middle brain equals paired node equals colliculus superior, whereby the spirit, that is the form of the spirit, is only the factor of the revival of consciousness with its entire personality block, but is also filigree distributed throughout the body and thus also every organ. As such a factor, the spirit exercises no ideas and thoughts, etc., but only impulses, for the function of thought and ideas, etc., are reserved solely for consciousness and ideas for the subconscious. Accordingly, it corresponds to a heresy when spoken of intellectual property, etc., for since the spirit develops neither ideas nor thoughts and feelings, because only the consciousness is capable of doing so, and this alone is reserved for this, there can be no intellectual property, but only a consciousness property. Equally, therefore, no spirit sickness and no spiritual confusion, etc., can appear, because the creative human spirit, that is the form of the spirit as a tiny piece of creative energy, is released from creation universal consciousness and is absolutely inviolable by human beings in every conceivable way. The consciousness of man can however be manipulated by him or others, and also by any damages such as accident or illness, rational, that is congestion or alcohol, drugs, gases or environmental influences, etc., resulting in loss of consciousness and so on. However, it is never possible that mental disorders and mental disorders, etc., can occur, because the spirit of man, like that of every other form of life, cannot be influenced or damaged by man. The spirit, which supplies the actual vital energy and life force for man, is in no way harmful, or that is in a manner which can be harmful to him, for he is completely taboo for man and also for all other forms of life, unmanageable and unsteerable, precisely in contrast to the consciousness, which can be controlled, steered, manipulated and controlled. Well, first, the term spirit, that is the original term Geist, is explained, which is originally traced back to the Nocademian universal nave and can be found in the storage benches, where the meaning awakening can also be found. Therefore, when for example of creative spirit energy, this means creative awakening energy. From this it is to be understood that the creation, that is the creation spirit, also called creation universe Geist energy, because creation is, as it were, the universe, and thus the total energy and power, a factor of awakening, that is of creativity, by the force, vibrations and impulses of its, that is his own energy. In this sense alone, the term spirit and spirit energy is to be understood. An addition in the storage banks explains that the term has always been handed down to the old language German, which ultimately resulted in the German language. When the German language group German was thrown into the background, the original term Geist experienced various changes, whereby the term ghost was finally formed. During the entire process of change, the conceptual sense was also lost, and was declared shudder, frighten, and excite, and so on, and ultimately, in modern times, to be mixed with religious and sectarian ideas of a god spirit, also in Greek with pneuma and in Latin with spiritus, etc. The spirit has been, for example, also linked to a soul, to the expectations of the beyond, and to this day also often includes spiritual assumptions concerning a pure or absolute, transpersonal or even transcendent spirituality, which is not bound to the bodily body, but which acts upon it, created by a god or equal to, or even identical to it. In the world of Christian thought, on the other hand, a Holy Spirit is understood as a person, symbolically represented as a dove or as an eye, the Spirit of God. The term spirit in general has also found its way into the linguistic usage of men on earth, thus causing very strange blossoms. Thus, for example, since ancient times, and up to the present time, the consciousness of man was falsely understood as a spirit. Consequently, this is addressed with the concept spirit, for example at a prayer. This can, in and of itself, be so accepted and left, because in this way it is true that in each case, one's own consciousness is always addressed, and it is animated to a valuable activity, even if man does not know this in his ignorance, and he is the whole of the effective difference value in spirit and consciousness neither knows nor understands. It is wrong, however, when the term spirit is associated with a divinity and with a belief in God, because in this case a man is foolishly trying to connect with something imaginary and non-existent, rather than through his thoughts and his will to express one's own consciousness, and to consciously influence and control it with regard to its needs, desires, ideas and desires, etc., in order to do and achieve what it wants. The man also erroneously uses the concept of spirit for his spirit and for his understanding, as well as erroneously in linguistic ways, such as his spirit has become confused, his spirit is disturbed, he is spirit-spirited, great spirits, he is not a great spirit, a man with an alert, slow, or slow spirit, he has spirit, a wise book, etc. Further, the totality of thoughts and ideas is designated, as is the event in the spirit experienced or seen in the spirit before him. An attitude or attitude is also connected with the spirit. Even the manifestations of life and the spirit of modern times or other time, etc., are misused, although the spirit has nothing to do with all these things and factors, because consciousness is the sole responsibility. Other completely false forms are also found in the speeches on spirits from fermented fruits and berries, etc., such as strawberry spirits, etc. In the case of humans, too, with regard to certain qualities and abilities, to the effect which they exert, term spirit is used, as well as she is the good spirit of the house, thou art a restless spirit, a serviceable spirit, etc. In the end, the term spirit is also falsely used for, supposedly, recurring deceased, revenants, vampires, as well as for formidable ghostly appearances of the dead. In some places and in popular belief, natural beings are also described as human beings as spirit or air spirit, as are also alleged supernatural beings, ghosts, and, as already mentioned, the Holy Spirit, the spirit of darkness with the devilish spirit. We continue with the belief in spirits, to an evil or good spirit, as well as to the speech are you abandoned by all good spirits as a spirit or spirit-spirited, etc. Things and states, etc., are wrongly designated, which is not the least, such as comprehension, selectivity, pardon, conceptual, character, imagination, sensation, insight, experience, cognizance, expert, skill, feeling, scholarship, cleverness, spirit size, spirit power, mental strength, spirit, genius, spirit, humor, wealth of ideas, individuality, inner life, inner world, interior, instinct, intelligence, prudence, coryphée, creativity, joy of life, lamp, motherhood, nature, natural, phenomenon, personality, productivity, psyche, talent, vision, perspicacity, slyness, wit, creativeness, creativity, creative personality, soul, specialist, judgment, predisposition, vision, delusion, wisdom, farsightedness, wit, nature of being, etc. Some people on the planet think that the spirit is the brain, while others assume that any other part or function of the body, such as the consciousness, as a spirit. But this is fundamentally wrong, for the brain is purely physical material, and in this consciousness is anchored. The brain itself is something that can be seen with the eyes when it is released, but it can also be measured externally, or measured with electromagnetic probes in its activity. So it can be photographed, analyzed and operated on. This, while consciousness is not determinable in this way because it is a subtle function of the brain and can only be measured electronically in its activity. In contrast to the brain, the spirit is not a material, but a very subtle nature, and therefore much more subtle than the subtle consciousness, which exerts a partial function in the brain. And since the spirit is of the finest nature, it can neither be observed by any apparatus, nor by instruments, nor by eyes, viewed or otherwise registered. Thus, he cannot be attacked, injured, or treated by an operation either by being photographed or even by physical or external circumstances, or by thoughts, feelings, illness, accident, drugs, poisons, drugs. The brain is, therefore, not the spirit, but this is simply a part of the body, and within it there is nothing that can be identified as a spirit, except the spirit itself. The Creator's spirit in the roof of the midbrain paired node equals colliculus superior, but apparently, etc., cannot be determined effectively. Thus, the whole body and the brain, as well as the consciousness of man and the spirit, are fundamentally different beings, which are fundamentally different in their coarse and subtle nature. And if consciousness is considered to be a function of the brain, then this may be, for example, to be extremely busy and active by thoughts, and jump from one object to another, while the body remains completely relaxed and motionless. The spirit itself is not affected in any way, for it is not identical with consciousness, but it is the creative energy factor which animates consciousness, which also drives the body and all its functions. This clearly states that consciousness, the body, and the brain are absolutely not of the same nature as the spirit. In the memory banks of Nocodemian, I have learned a word concerning the difference between the spirit and man, which vividly shows that the spirit of man is a tiny part of the creative spirit in man. Thus, this can be done with the human being, for example, are compared in the manner in which the human body is compared with an inn and guest house in which the spirit lingers as a guest, where he also feeds and pays for it. If, however, the inn and thus also the guest room is demolished or otherwise destroyed, then the spirit, who is a guest, leaves the site of destruction. To the human being, this means that the spirit resides in it as a guest and learns, food and legacies, while at the same time enlivening the whole body, paying food and lodging, and when man dies, the spirit immediately escapes the body and goes into its beyond, in order to be bound to it again in the next new personality in the next life and to be a new guest in the new human body. The spirit is not the brain, as it is not any other part of the human body. It must be understood as a formless continuum in the roof of the midbrain, equals paired node equals colliculus superior, of man. And because the spirit is by nature natureless or immaterial, it cannot be felt or impaired, nor be sick, nor can it be obstructed or injured by any material objects or by interventions of man. It is therefore very important to understand that there are no unfathomable or peaceful states of spirit, for such states are reserved for human consciousness alone. Only uncivilized or peaceful or diseased states can only appear in consciousness that can disturb or elevate inner peace, for only the consciousness is capable of anger, envy, and covetous attachment, delusions, or valuable, peaceful states, because the spirit itself is absolutely neutral in every way and does not interfere with consciousness. Man is, therefore, responsible in every respect for the well-being and woe of his consciousness. Consequently, he is always responsible for all his emotions and thoughts, spirit's psychological sufferings, but not his spirit as well as other people or bad social mate, ritual or social circumstances, etc. Truly, all these sufferings result from blinded and diseased as well as false states of consciousness, whereby the thoughts and emotions play a very important role. The most important point in the understanding of consciousness is that liberation from the above-mentioned sufferings cannot be found outside of it, but but only in itself as well as in the thoughts and emotions. A constant liberation can therefore not be found through the spirit, but only through the purification of consciousness as well as thoughts and emotions. If, therefore, man is to be free from consciousness, spirit, feeling, psychological suffering as well as from problems and worries, and if he wants to find lasting peace, freedom and harmony, and an everlasting inner happiness, then he must deepen his knowledge and understanding of consciousness. To locate and track down a human spirit at least at the present time is impossible for man because he has neither the necessary equipment, nor abilities, nor any other means to detect and measure the energy of the spirit. The human spirit, that is the spirit form, cannot be seen by man, because the pure creative energy of the spirit cannot be perceived or felt by the human eye. There are also no apparatuses or analyzers, etc., nor in the field of ultraviolet or infrared, by which it would be possible to divide the spirit, that is the spirit form or the creative spirit energy, at all visible or measurable. It is also not possible for a particular state of consciousness of the human being, the spirit, that is the spiritual form, is as invisible as the pure air. The spirit, that is the spirit form of man, is purely creative, energetic in nature, and has nothing to do with consciousness, nor with the brain currents that can be perceived and measured. Erroneously, consciousness has been described as a spirit of man since ancient times, but the spirit is completely different from consciousness. The spirit, that is the spirit form of man, is purely creative, while consciousness is a factor of man, his brain, and is responsible for the formation of thoughts, and the whole of the ratio is thus derived. So also reason and reason. The spirit, that is the spirit form, on the other hand, is the creatively naturally determined energy which animates the consciousness and the human body. When the spirit leaves the human body, it escapes into its realm of existence, which exists in the same space as the present reality of the planet, whereby the so-called beyond life is dimensioned differently to the real material reality space, in a finely materialistic, energetic nature. With regard to the planet, the plane of the beyond is thus arranged around it, as this plane is further given to the universe, but opposite the material plane of reality in a subtle plane to which man as a material form of life has no access to see nothing and to perceive nothing and to not communicate with others. Thus it is impossible for man to divide the spirit which has escaped from the material body, to see the spirit form or to perceive it in any other way, to enter into a communicative connection. The fact that the world beyond the planet is arranged in a differently dimensioned form as the real material reality space, not only in this, but also in the entire universe, has its justification. Thus it emerges from the doctrine of the spirit that if a planet is destroyed or simply incapacitated, then the existing spirit forms and the other disturbing spirit energies are not destroyed, but that they migrate to the world through space pull until a new planet is found on which human life exists. On this planet the spirit forms or Geist energy and then again, intermixes with already existing there and thus arrive again, that is further into a cycle of reincarnation. The rebirth. Samjaza Silver Star Center, August 21, 2016, 00:15 hours. Billy.